Hey everybody, my name is Fred Van Lente, and with Ryan Dunlavey I did a book called The Comic Book History of Comics, and we'll be presenting it to you in a new way in this series of videos. I'll be going through the book chapter by chapter, and sort of doing video annotations where I'm going to sort of take you behind the scenes and show you some of the comics, and the videos, and the photos, and the comic strips, comic books, graphic novels that sort of informed each story in the book, and hopefully bring us all a little bit closer to the history of our medium. And if you dig it, if you dig what you see, please go ahead and get the full version of the Comic Book History Comics from the retailer where you got this video from. So without further ado, let's dive into Chapter 1. The Comic Book History of Comics by Fred Van Lente and Ryan Dunlavey. Chapter 1. Funnies Get Famous. October 18th, 1896 was, all things considered, a fairly unremarkable day, as days go. Somebody tried to kill the King of Spain by laying dynamite in front of the royal locomotive as it trudged towards Madrid. The government blamed independence-minded Cubans. An accused burglar named James Sweeney slipped through the bars of his cell and walked out of the Brooklyn jail where he had been awaiting trial. Must be how he got into his victim's home so easily. In Budapest, due to an unaccountable blunder by his opponent, a Dr. Noah won his match in the 10th round of the International Chess Tournament, though Mr. Charosek remained in the lead. And William Randolph Hearst published the first issue of The American Humorist, a color supplement to the New York Journal that featured something that had never been seen before. Something that would change the lives of every single person holding this book, even though no one, not even Hearst himself, suspected it at the time. For the humorist contained the first modern comic strip, Richard F. Outcault's The Yellow Kid. As historians Bill Blackbeard and Martin Williams write, the kid earns this distinction because, quote, the whole point of the vaudeville gag depended on the dialogue between the kid and the parrot, and that was the first time this had occurred in a graphic work which also met the other prerequisites of the strip form. Satirical pictures in print in and of themselves were nothing new. In fact, they are nearly as old as the printing press itself, which was invented in 1440. This engraving at left by German artist Erhard Schoen, depicting religious reformer Martin Luther as the literal instrument of Satan, is believed to be the first political cartoon published in the 1500s. Pictures talking inside the confines of word balloons were nothing new either. As seen below, that device had been used since at least the 18th century. But while previous proto-comics may have had successive images and or dialogue, Outcault's innovation was to merge the two together into a narrative cadence that rendered a facsimile of real life as it was lived by the reader, or at the very least copied the rat-and-tat back-and-forth comedy routines common in the vaudeville theater of the day. This is an actual series of dialogue in this poster, which is the woman saying, "Where are you going?" and the man says, "Don't know!" See, the actual dialogue is down here. It is difficult for us to wrap our brains around how revolutionary this change was, since we all grew up in a world already fully made by it. Here we've tried to imagine just how difficult it would be to reproduce the most famous vaudeville routine of all time in the style of comics pre-Outcault. So you'd have a bunch of drawings here, and the title over it would be, "They sure give ball players funny names these days. Who is on first? What is on second? I don't know is on third. Tomorrow is pitching." In these kinds of old comics, a series of humorous drawings would be arrayed on the page, linked by a similar theme perhaps, but with no necessary connection between them. They were not yet sequential art in the sense of the term coined by the legendary Will Eisner. Until Outcault pioneered exchanges between characters in the form of live dialogue like this. "If I'm going to play on your team, Fred, you should tell me the players' names." "I'd be happy to, Ryan, though you should know they sure give ball players funny names these days." "How so?" "Well, let's see. We have in the bags. Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third." "That's what I want to know." "I say, who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third." "Are you the manager?" "Yes." "And you know your guys' names?" "Of course I do." "Then who's on first?" "Yes." "I mean the fellow's name." "Who?" "The guy on first." "Who?" "The first baseman." "Who?" "The guy playing." "Who is on first?" "I'm asking you who's on first." "That's the man's name." "That's whose name?" "Right." "Well, go ahead and tell me." "You just did." "Look, you got a first baseman?" "Certainly." "Who's on first?" "That's right." When you pay the first baseman every month, who gets the money? Every penny. Ah! See, by doing this, Outcault injected into the medium that a priori subjective condition the great philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote is required for the very concept of sequence: time. See how easy it is to do a vaudeville routine in this style, which mimics the rhythms of speech. The change is as simple and as profound as the difference between merely looking at pictures and reading them. And to drive that home even further, I wanted to show you guys this. This is the complete strip unto itself. This is sort of the very first quote-unquote vaudeville strip that Outcault did with the Yellow Kid. And per usual, the Yellow Kid's dialogues, his thoughts, actually printed on his smock. So, and he's carrying under his arm a phonograph, which is sort of the cutting-edge tech of its day, right? So, this would be comparable to a webcomic being about Uber or something. You're combining two very new things into one package. And the gag here, of course, as you can read here, is that the Yellow Kid is conversing with the phonograph, yet crazily is also responding to Yellow Kid, and he's very surprised until this parrot comes out, and of course the joke is that the parrot was hiding in the phonograph the whole time. Oh my gosh, isn't that hilarious? Well, perhaps you'd have to be in the 19th century to fully appreciate it, but regardless, however one wishes to define the difference, the proof that something big had happened was in the public reaction to it. The Yellow Kid became an instant cultural phenomenon. His bucktooth mug appeared on books, shirts, tins of ginger wafers, bowling pins. There were even Yellow Kid cigarettes. Outcault had created the Kid in Hogan's Alley, a series of slum vignettes he drew for the New York World, but Hearst lured him back to the journal with a huge bump in salary. The publisher made a shrewd investment. The journal's circulation exploded along with the Kid's popularity. Outcault's old boss and Hearst's arch-nemesis, Joseph Pulitzer, claimed he owned the rights to the name Hogan's Alley, however, and hired an artist to continue the strip after its creator's defection. For almost a year, the Kid appeared in Pulitzer's World and Hearst's journal simultaneously, leading more respectable and lower-selling dailies to refer to them contemptuously as the Yellow Kid Papers, and the brand of sensationalistic, jingoistic muckraking they practiced, particularly in the hysteria-fueled lead-up to the Spanish-American War of 1898, was dubbed yellow journalism. Outcault's success was not lost on other newspaper artists, like Harry Conway Bud Fisher, sports page illustrator for the San Francisco Chronicle and horse racing junkie. Yeesh, I bet Outcault doesn't have to sweat losses like this. Hey, wait a minute. What if I tried a cartoon? One about the ponies. It can run on the racing form page. I can even give betting tips. While most comics in those days, as our previous pages suggest, were vertical amorphous blobs, Fisher chose to arrange his panels horizontally across the page like this. So, he said, I would get a prominent position across the top of the sporting page, which I did, and that pleased my vanity. The Chronicle's editor resisted the format at first because he feared it would be difficult to read. But Fisher's MUTT, which premiered on November 15, 1907, greatly increased comics' readability. The standardization of panel borders rendered each individual picture an unmistakably distinct unit. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with MUTT, which is better known in its more famous version as Mutt and Jeff, here is a look at such a strip. If I can find it. There it is. I don't know why that was so hard. So you can see this is a very early strip from 1913 by Mr. Fisher. Very similar to the strips that became common throughout the golden age of comic strips. I find it interesting that in as early as 1913 there are no borders in between the panels. It's just a straight line. But you can see Fisher was a super talented cartoonist and definitely even got some action in there. Mutt and Jeff will come up later, believe it or not, as this story continues. Now, with regards to the standardization of panel borders, a similar achievement had been achieved in writing with the standardization of punctuation marks, themselves invented around the 9th century, that accompanied the rise of the printing press, allowing words to be separated in distinct sentences and phrases with periods, commas, and the like. The hilarious MUTT was an overnight hit, so Hearst pulled an Outcault and lured Fisher away to his San Francisco Examiner with more dough. Right before defecting, Fisher snuck into the Chronicle engraving room and etched a copyright slug in his name onto the plate of his final strip for them. Fisher's defense of his copyrights paid off. His strip made him so rich, he soon owned the largest stable of racehorses in the U.S. By that time, Fisher had given Mutt a sidekick, and the strip became known as Mutt and Jeff. Impressed by Fisher's success in Frisco, Hearst started running the Mutt and Jeff in his papers across the country, multiplying its popularity. This practice, known as syndicating, assured fans they'd always get their funnies no matter where they lived. By 1913, Hearst needed a new subsidiary of his newspaper empire to control syndication of all his many strips. The head of the company, Moses Koenigsberg, ultimately named it after a shortened version of his own name, King. Soon the rights to all comic strips in the major American dailies would be controlled by a handful of powerful syndicates like Hearst's King Features. Fame and fortune continued to lure artists from other fields into strip cartooning. Winsor McCay, for instance, started out as a sign paper for a dime museum in Cincinnati. His dreams of a rare bit fiend was soon joined by Little Nemo and Slumberland, among the most beloved of all the early strips. The title Tot's surreal adventures whenever he closed his eyes encouraged his creator to add a new technique to the artist-storyteller's arsenal. Page layout is narrative tool. He began to vary panel sizes to give visual emphasis to his narrative. Little panels to focus on small, intimate actions, big panels for dramatic actions or epic reveals. Artists learned they could pace cartoon stories to their own internal rate, just as writers could use different phrase and sentence length to set an internal cadence for their prose. Now, don't take my word for it, although Ryan does an absolutely admirable job of aping Winsor McCay. Here are some of his pages from the early 20th century. You can see just his incredible line work, use of color. His designs are spectacular. I mean, just look at that. It's just spectacular stuff. Early use of word balloons, and here you can really see how he really thinks about the page layout with Nemo going down this ladder, and the panels elongate then as he descends the airship. Classic stuff. Like many superstar cartoonists, McCay performed his own live vaudeville act known as chalk talking, thrilling packed houses by aging a sketch from childhood to old age in minutes while an organist played Sweet Mystery of Life. He actually missed the opening of the Broadway musical version of Little Nemo because he was performing in the theater across the street. This movement-obsessed artist realized he could juice up his act by incorporating the new medium of motion pictures. Between 1912 and 1914, McCay painstakingly drew, then photographed 10,000 drawings of a lovable Diplodocus to create Gertie the Dinosaur, an animated film that was projected next to McCay during his live show so he could appear to interact with the creature. Be a good girl, Gertie, and bow to the audience. Gertie performs boredom, spite, sadness, frivolity, excitement, self-consciousness, marking the short as the birth of character animation. So, again, Ryan does a great job, but what if we went to the source here? So the idea here is McCay would play this film during his live act, right? So forget these title cards are here. What you'd really see would be McCay on stage, and he'd be much smaller in the live show, and say to the audience, "Come out, Gertie, and make a pretty brow." Gertie's all very shy here, doesn't want to come out, right? And again, keep in mind, McCay hand drew every single one of these frames, including the sea monster, including the rock, by himself. Cell animation had not been invented yet, so he actually redrew every background every time. Did this take him a long time to do? Why, yes it did. Gertie would dance and do all that fun stuff, and the audiences, of course, ate it up. Unfortunately, Hearst, McCay's publisher, believed the quality of his strips had begun to decline because of his extracurricular activities. Citizen Kane bullied theater owners into dropping McCay's act. Few of McCay's fellow early animators shared his borderline obsessive-compulsive disorder to detail. The movement in their films was crude, shuddery, and often difficult for audiences to follow. Valdemar Comfort, try saying that 5 times fast, editor of Popular Science magazine, got so disgusted by the quality of a cartoon he saw in 1915 that he complained to his art director, "Max, you're a bright young man, you're an artist, you understand mechanics, you've got a scientific mind. Surely you can come up with some idea, some way to make animated cartoons look better, smoother, more lifelike." Max Fleischer's dad had been an amateur inventor, and Max had inherited his knack for gadgetry. Taking up his boss's challenge, Max spent the next 2 years laboring on his rotoscope, a device that projected a strip of movie film onto a flat plate of glass, 1 frame at a time. An artist could then set a piece of paper over the glass and trace each photograph individually. When all the drawings were refilmed, they produced completely smooth animation. Max's first few rotoscoped Out of the Inkwell shorts starring Coco the Clown, who in his pre-animated live-action incarnation was originally Max's younger brother Dave, soon launched the world-famous Fleischer Studios. And again, why let me tell you about it when I can show you exactly what I'm talking about? So, again, like McCay, most early animation started off with these live action bits. And, you know, really the early animated films were not unlike Jurassic Park. They were the early special effects showcases. People still couldn't believe that how people made these things move. In fact, an old conspiracy theory from the 19-teens was that these were not drawings at all, but actually puppets, stop motion animated, which sounds crazy to us today. But of course, back in those days, you know, people still loved their conspiracy theories. And so you see how smooth and lifelike that animation is. That's because this isn't a drawing. This is a tracing of a guy dressed as a clown, putting pants on and kicking his feet up and all that good stuff. So you get the point. And of course, this can all be watched by you on YouTube at your leisure. What does Fleischer have in common with Outcault, Fisher, McCay, and our other early animators? He also started out as a newspaper cartoonist at the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. But newspapers were not the only or even the primary mass medium that influenced our main subject. And for that, you're going to have to wait until part 2, where we're going to talk about pulp magazines. So I hope that was fun. That was my inaugural attempt at doing this. I hope it pleased, and I hope you come back for part 2. Thanks again, and thanks for helping out in this try.